Joining me now is the founder of the Stewart Group, Don Stewart. We call him Stu. And welcome to Perino on Politics. This is where I call up all my smart friends and find out what's on their minds about the state of American politics. Stu, you moved to Florida, so you have a good outside view, even though you know Washington inside and out. And I feel like we are still having this hangover from last week's speech from the president did, the joint session to Congress, but not because of things that he said necessarily. The story that has lasted seems to be this realization that people are coming to that the Democrats are in much worse shape than even some of them realize. Peggy Noonan wrote about it over the weekend. Dan Balls of the Washington Post. Mark Halperin said something similar. And I wonder, from your vantage point, how you see that.
Yeah, I fear that we're outrunning, our politics is outrunning the populace. And I think that those types of stunts and all that is something that they're going to continue to try until they find their footing and see what works best against the president, because it's clearly different than the last administration. He's doing different things with different people, so they're trying new tactics, and I think they'll find what works at some point, but that wasn't it.
The House leader for the Democrats, Hakeem Jeffries, did an interview, well, I don't know if it was an interview, it was like a video for YouTube over the weekend in which he said, now, this is Hakeem Jeffries speaking, we have the Republicans on the run. And he was talking in particular about the economy, or he was trying to, and specifically about Medicaid. But I just look at the whole situation and I think, why can't he just be honest about their situation? The Republicans are not on the run. They're mostly united. They got problems, and they're complex problems, and we can talk about those. But I don't think it's very convincing to try to tell us that they have Republicans on the run.
No, I think if you look at the first 50 days of the administration and the Congress, I don't think anybody thought the entire cabinet would be confirmed in less than 50 days, or they'd pass a border security bill already, or that they'd already be planning for the reconciliation bill and tax reform and things like that. I think the leadership has really shown that they're able to buckle down and get work done. And I think that's probably the discrepancy that people are seeing, a combination of two choices. Do we buckle down and actually get work done, do the things that we're supposed to do, or do we talk about it? Both are, things that have been tried and true methods, but I think there's a pretty big discrepancy between what the Senate and the House leadership are doing and the opposition.
Sometimes these losses, like the Democrats had in 2024, take a while to process. But somebody who is the governor of California, he's got some popularity. It seems to me he has further ambition. I think he'd like to run for president. Yeah. And he has decided to start a podcast. Now, he said he's going to invite people from the MAGA world on so that they can just have a conversation, challenge his thinking, so he can talk things through. Now, this got a little bit of ridicule, including from some of us on the Five, even though we all said it's probably smart. Stu, right now, he is number 7 in all of podcasts because people are curious about what this is like. And somebody like Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who I would say doesn't have a great record, but can, going this route, give him a new lease on life to run for president?
Well, I think it's really hard. I would say since 2008, it's really, really hard to win a general election without having to go through, the far edges of your party. And for him to walk away from where he's been politically and where he's very proud of being politically, and to try to shift away from that, I think will cost him in a primary situation when everybody's running farther to the edges. I think will be difficult for him. It's an interesting approach. It's probably a smart approach, but we'll see if the party lets him get away with it. It's not Republicans he has to worry about. It's his own party.
Right. And this morning, you and I were emailing about an article that said Democrats are coming to the realization that the traditional media that has usually, always, I guess as long as you and I have been working together, which is about 25, 30 years now, the communications people that work for the Democrats have such easy jobs for the most part, right? It was just like, you don't even really have to work. The media echoes what you say. And I always say, if you're in corporate America, hire Republicans because they've had to work harder for it. But now that's changing, and it's like all of a sudden they're starting to realize it. But one of the problems is they've mostly been talking amongst themselves. Can you describe for people from a communication standpoint why that is dangerous, not just even in politics, but in any situation?
Yeah, I think whether it's business or politics, that's sort of a dangerous feedback loop where you're only talking to the people who already support you, whether it's your existing customers or your existing political base. If you're only talking to them, they want more. And you saw that with some of the videos the Democrats were doing with foul language. Now, that appealed to a segment of them, and that made them happy. So the feedback they got was that was a good thing. But for people like my mom, that was a horrible thing.
I think it's terrible and so unpersuasive. And all of a sudden, all the Democrats are cursing. Yeah. And you have to bleep them out when you run their sound bites. It's really weird.
And it's not just the Democrats. A lot of people in the media now are comfortable on TV saying things that, George Carlin would have gotten in trouble 4 years ago. But I do think that's a problem. If you're only speaking to your customer base, if you're only speaking in the business world, and if you're only speaking to your political base and getting in this cycle, you're getting further and further away from the people that you're trying to convert. If you're only preaching to the choir, nobody in the pews is going to listen to what you're saying. And that's a real danger. I think Trump kind of expanded on that, and he had people that listened to him outside of the normal Republican base, obviously. That's how he got elected. But you have to expand or you're going to shrivel up. The same thing in media. The media has to expand who they're speaking to, or they're going to lose customers.
You have said before that there is only one Trump. He's unique. And I think that some of these people that are, I guess, trying to imitate him, it's so embarrassing and cringe.
Yeah, it's a real problem. I mean, he really truly is unique. Nobody else could have gotten away with a lot of the things that he said, a lot of things he's done, the way he's done it, his personality. He is unique. So when other people try to copy that and try to go out on a limb and go farther away from their traditional communication style, people see that. People know that that's not him. We saw that in the primary, both 8 years ago and this primary. There were some people, even in the Republican Party, who tried to out-Trump Trump. It just didn't work. And if people stick to what they know and what their customers want or what their political base wants, that's a different story. But going away from that and trying to out-Trump him, don't do it.
James Carville, a famous Democrat, he's older now, of course. He's got a lot of thoughts about the Democratic Party. He suggested the Democrats should just wait. Just let things play out for a little while before they pounce. Is that a good strategy?
Well, yes and no. I mean, when President Obama was elected, Republicans were really back on their heels. I mean, he was a wildly popular president, and a lot of us counseled to sit back, try to work with him, try to, listen and try to engage rather than fighting everything that came out. That lasted a while, and it was successful for a while. But then he came out with policies that were unpopular. Obamacare started out very popular, but by the summer of his first year in office, it was upside down. So the stimulus bill was unpopular after a few months, other things. So when Republicans talked about actual policy and not personality, and we talked about what he was actually proposing, we were successful. I think Democrats have that opportunity as well. I mean, there are things that the president's going to propose that people don't like. But right now he's doing 80-20 issues, the men and women's locker rooms, border security,
plastic straws, don't forget them.
Plastic straws, water heaters, you name it. Those are things that people support. Now, trying to fight him on everything doesn't make a lot of sense when you're up against an 80-20 issue or even a 60-40 issue.
Last question in this segment about the Democrats, and then in the next segment, we'll talk about Republicans and what's on their plate. Do you think that when they figure this out, and they will eventually, that it will come from within Washington or from outside?
I don't know who's outside waiting in the wings yet. I really don't. I think that the most well-known people outside of maybe Governor Newsom are inside. And if they understand what they want to do, if they're not running for president necessarily, and people see that they're not just trying to run for president, I think there's plenty of people inside the Beltway that could take up that mantle.
All right. We'll be right back with more Perino on politics. And we are back with Perino on politics. Okay, we talked about the Democrats. Let's move on to Republicans, who are mostly united, but they have got some big issues on their plate. They don't have a big margin in the House, and a little bit more comfortable in the Senate, even though it might not sound huge to some. Having those couple of extra votes in the Senate really can make a difference. Right. One of the first big thing they have to do is avoid a government shutdown if they can. Right. That funding runs out at the end of this week. do you think they avoid a shutdown?
Yeah, I think so. I think the president getting behind the House bill is a big deal, and if he stays there, I think
Can you just for the moms? Can you explain what the House bill is?
The House bill is largely continues current funding. It shuts some, trims some, adds some to the defense bill. I say some. I'm talking about billions of dollars, but in Washington parlance, that's some. But some is trimmed and some is not. But it largely continues the existing funding streams for federal programs through September. And it gives more time for them to figure out their budgets, their reconciliation bills, all the other things before they have to finalize the larger funding bills for the rest of the year.
The other thing that they have to do is the bigger one. And this is something that took up a lot of time in the first Trump administration. And that is his vision for a refreshed and renewed tax code, and a spending plan sort of going forward, not just keeping the government open, but wholesale change of
Right.
many, many programs. Can you explain to people how that will work and what to look for? It's easy, I think, in this case to get caught up in the weeds. Like, I have stopped reading stories about whether there's going to be a shutdown.
Right.
Because up until there is, it's just going to go back and forth and back and forth. And I feel like I know that story pretty well. But
Right.
the bigger question on the longer term issues, how will that play?
Well, the reconciliation bills, which is it's a procedure to get around the ability of senators to filibuster. So it allows for a more expedited procedure to pass things with just one party support. It's not always just with one party support. Remember, George W. Bush passed tax reform with bipartisan support. But in this case, it would allow Republicans to pass a bill on their own. It requires a lot of steps. You have to pass a budget that the House and Senate both agree to. Then you have to get a reconciliation bill that they both agree to. And there's a lot of votes and a lot of ways for people to sabotage that bill. That will likely take months of negotiating before they get that bill to the floor. That's my expectation. Potentially even several months before that's finalized and on the floor and passed. But that's all encompassing. That's a lot of the president's agenda will be in that bill. So he has a lot of work to shore up support in Congress and get a bill that he wants done that will accomplish his agenda.
And it would include things like his campaign promises of no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, et cetera. The one thing that they're not doing, and you and I are a little bit old school when it comes to looking at the budget, it's just that a lot of the things he's proposing, they might be good policy and that might add to growth. But the huge amount of money that is required every year to take care of Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid, it's just really hard to find a great way to get back to balance unless you have a major pro-growth strategy where you all of a sudden the economy is going gangbusters and you're bringing in a lot more revenue, which could happen, except for like right now, Stu, you saw from a communication standpoint, the Trump administration make a pivot over the last several days to try to explain to people that there might be some economic pain to go through while President Trump works out his tariff plan. How is that playing?
Right. I think that's a real issue because you really do have to have structural changes in order to get the deficit and long-term debt in line. And without bipartisan support, that's just not going to happen. No one party is going to do major structural changes on their own. I was talking to one of the members that was involved in the big negotiation back 10, 15 years ago, the super committee. And they were so frustrated that we couldn't get it done at that point because that would have taken so many of these issues off the table and we would have saved so much. But now we're at a point where it's just impossible without any kind of major bipartisan support to do those kind of changes. Now, as to the rest of this, the economy and what things like tariffs and other issues will do, yeah, I think the president's been pretty clear that there will be some short-term disruptions and people will feel these before the benefits of them kick in. If you look at onshoring some of these facilities, an auto plant, for example, is about 1 million square feet. That doesn't happen overnight. And so the concern is that the consumers are going to feel the pinch of these well before the benefits and the new jobs of these onshored facilities will take effect.
Right. So let's just go a little bit further on that because Peter always says, how long do you think it takes to get one of these factories up and running? The idea to bring manufacturing back to the United States, it's a great goal. And I love the idea, and maybe it's even already underway.
Right.
But it does take some time. So automaking, and I know you know a lot about the car manufacturing world. How important is that to bring back to the United States, and will it be effective?
It's underway and it's important, and they like building facilities where their customers are. And this is a major market, obviously, for the auto industry. So they are doing that. There are a lot of facilities springing up all over the country. And the president said just this weekend that he expects a bunch of announcements to come. And he's been working with industry on that. But those are long-term plans, because not only do you have to move a 1 million square foot facility, but you have to bring in the supply chain and the delivery system and the franchise market. So there's a lot that goes on with it. And a lot of those decisions were made after USMCA to work with our partners in Canada and Mexico to do those facilities. A lot of these products go back and forth across the border multiple times before the car is finished.
Can you explain to people why that is?
Why USMCA was so important?
No. Why a car, before it gets made, the parts, everything goes back and forth several times.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think I conceptually understand it, but it does seem quite inefficient. But I assume that it's done because of efficiency.
Exactly. It is much more efficient to do it that way, and to have places that specialize in certain things like wiring harnesses or assembly of individual parts, or transmission facility in Indiana, and you have a different part somewhere else. But it's all done in a streamlined way that works best for that labor market and that transportation, that infrastructure, so that it can be combined in the most efficient way so that the consumer has the best product at the lowest price. Now, if you disrupt that, that could change for the consumer. The consumer could feel that. And everything they're doing is about the consumer, because you can't get ahead of the consumer. If the consumer doesn't want it or doesn't want to pay for it, you're out of luck.
Is that what happened with electric vehicles?
Well, I do think that it definitely outpaced the demand. And I think auto industry has been very clear about what that means. And they don't want to get ahead of the consumer. They want to offer as many choices as possible so that the consumer can make the best choice for them and their family at the best price. But there has been disruption there. And, we're at about 10% now. And the current regulations have us going to about 50% in a few years. And that's a challenge.
When these factories get built in America, let's say that new car manufacturing factories are getting built here, are most of those jobs, or is most of the work going to be done by people, or is it more robotic?
Well, there's plenty of technology in auto facilities, but there's also a huge mass of people. I've been in facilities across the country, and you meet the folks that work there, and it's generational. There's folks that have been doing that, and their parents did it, and their grandparents did it. And these facilities bring a lot of jobs and a lot of economy. And again, it's not just the auto facility itself. It's the suppliers, it's the hotels and restaurants, and the mechanics and everything else around there that it brings to it. It sucks up so much economic growth around that plant that it's hard to measure. It's not just the plant.
Hey, who knew we were going to have economics lesson 101 right here on Perino on Politics? Hey, we'll be right back with more Perino on Politics. And we're back with Perino on Politics. Stu, I like what I heard you're going to talk about here. What am I missing? What do people need to know about?
Well, I've been looking a lot at polling lately, and I think a lot of us, myself included, have been misreading polls. And I think there's an opportunity for people to go a lot deeper. I've noticed a few things. One is a lot of polls are driven for headlines. And if people only read the headlines, as they often do, they miss the actual mechanics of the poll and what it actually means. And the other is a high quality independent poll is really, really expensive. So you're going to see fewer and fewer of those. You saw Monmouth is expected to shut down.
Yeah, Monmouth University has been doing polls forever since you and I have been working together. And
right.
Monmouth University announced over the weekend that it is shutting its polling division. I sent a note to Stu. I said, what do you think this means?
Yeah, it's tough because real quality polling is expensive, and you open yourself up. No matter what the poll is, half the country's going to think it's wrong.
Yeah,
and you're going to get there's reputational damage just from doing a poll. No matter what the poll is or how good it is, you're going to have reputational damage. Another thing that's grown just in the time you and I have been doing this is the ability to hire a pollster. Not a legitimate, high-quality pollster like we're used to dealing with, but the ability to hire a polling company that you may never have heard of to do a poll and provide them the types of questions you want, and then to have that poll be given to the media and you get a headline. Now, the poll may not show what is the actual reality, but you can get a headline out of it, and people don't dig any deeper. And then the third thing that I really wish that more polling industry folks would do is to do the follow-up questions. 4 or 5 years ago, AP did a poll on climate change, for example, and it found a significant number of the country, I think it was 70%, said the government ought to do more about climate change. But then they asked the follow-up question, what if your utility rates went up by $1? That number dropped. What if it went up by $10 a month? It went to 2/3 opposition. So it was a totally different story from what the original polling question was, which was, I thought, a fascinating way to do the poll. Same thing could be done with taxing the rich. People love to tax the rich because nobody thinks they're rich. So it's always somebody else. People are altruistic until it costs them money. So if there's more polling follow-up questions that were done, oh yeah, sure, I want to do that. Okay, well, what if it costs you money? What if it comes at the cost of cutting some other program? There's just not enough of that. And I think partly because it is so expensive, there's just not enough of that in polls that would make for much more interesting reporting on the polls.
There was one of those during the Democratic primary in 2016, maybe it was 2016, when Bernie Sanders had the Medicare for All plan.
Right.
And so if you ask people, do you think everyone should have Medicare? It'd be like, oh yeah, 80% said yes. If it meant that you could not see your doctor and it would cost you twice as much and this would, no. So I would get very frustrated with people sometimes that I even work with who would say, Medicare for All is so popular. I'm like, no, it's not. That's not being honest. So I think that's a really good point, Stu.
Yeah, and I think if there's more of that, and I understand that it's expensive, I understand there's a lot of other equities to look at, but I think those would generate much more interesting stories, and consumers would be much more well-informed if those were the type of follow-up questions they got in the poll.
Do you think text messaging polling works?
I don't know. I erase and report junk every text I get, so I don't know. And I get these calls all the time from polling firms I've never heard of, and I hang up. So I don't know who's answering them, but I don't think it's a good sample.
Well, I appreciate you always taking my call. Don Stewart. Thanks. Go have a great day. Thanks, everybody.